This is the art of storytelling, and coming up in the next 5 minutes to 7 minutes, we're going to talk about satisfying endings. What does the story want to imprint? The beginning, middle, and end, and when to stop, and also a little bit about button endings. Now, I talk a lot about satisfying endings because I already mentioned the milk and cookie moments that you get. Sid Field talks about them and he says it's that stuff that keeps you awake 2 o'clock in the morning, and it's something about a plot that worries you. But satisfying endings are also, there's more to it than that, right? So as you get into looking at the story that somebody told, and you're saying it was Monday, or was it Wednesday, or was it, it must have been Wednesday, yeah, because the moment that a story starts wandering, meandering, you eventually land up with who really cares, right? And this is one of the key things about how you set up your story. Now, I want to show you a clip that is, I don't necessarily have the rights for, but I would love for you to see it anyway. There's this fabulous show that was written by Aaron Sorkin, and it was, I think there were only 21 episodes. It was just the one season that ran. But it was fantastic, and it's a show called Studio 60. And in the scene, there's another one of my favorite actors, who is Matthew Perry, plays the scriptwriter in a sitcom or a weekly sketch comedy show. And in this particular scene, Sarah Paulson comes to him. She is one of the leads, and she asks him to help her with a joke. Now, she's not a person who tells jokes, and he's, of course, a jokes person, and that is sort of this immediate tension that is there between the two characters. But I just love this scene. See if you can figure out why, because we're going to talk about those points of comedy and storytelling, and they're going to land really well in this. Check this out.
A Jewish guy calls his mother and says, "Mom, how are you?" And the mother says, "Terrible. I haven't eaten in 38 days." And he says, "Why haven't you eaten in 38 days?" And the mother says, "I didn't want my mouth full in case you should call."
All right. A Jewish guy has his mouth full.
What?
Wait. A Jewish guy calls his mother. He hasn't eaten in 38 days.
The mother hasn't eaten in 38 days.
The mother hasn't eaten in 38 days.
No, the guy says, "How are you, Mom?" And the mother says,
I haven't eaten in 38 days.
Right.
Yes.
And the son says, "Why haven't you eaten in 38 days?"
Because my mouth is full. I didn't want my mouth to be full. Let me start from the beginning.
What the hell is the matter with you?
Don't pressure me. Tell me it again.
Hang on. I've seen this syndrome before. Do me a favor. Guy walks into a doctor's office with a duck on his head. The doctor says, "What can I do for you?" The duck says, "Doc, would you get this guy off my ass?"
A guy and a duck walk into a doctor's office.
Yeah, you can't tell a joke.
You can't tell a joke. That is end line as a punchline. What's really charming about the scene is that it really demonstrates very well what those three key things are that you have to have as you work with a story. There are these devices that you have to have in place, which is a setup. In this instance, finally, it's the one about the duck. You have this tick-tock rhythm that you feel in the storytelling, and that is that rhythm that I was talking about that really pulls the audience in and gets you ready for the punchline or the payoff. So there you have it as the three things, the three devices that you should really have in place for your story. And isn't it that this is remarkably close to the 3-act structure as we talk about every single week? That's another slide that I try and put in everywhere, because beginning, middle, and end are possibly the most important things that you can have to anything that you do. So there's the structure there, again, in a tiny story where there's a setup or a contextualizing, scene sets, there's this tick-tock rhythm that happens, which is the body or the knot, and at the end of it, you hit an aha moment, which is your unraveling or so. So again, it always comes back to the beginning, the middle, and the end of your structure of a story. And if I had to give you some notes on storytelling, I'm going to start at the bottom of the list, because you have to have a clear ending in mind. It really is important to know where you're going to land it. You want to know where the story is going to go. If there's something funny you want to say about this, or something serious that you want to land, you know what that is, and that is really essentially where you have to start when you devise that story and you build the story. Now, after that, you then go to clearly define the stakes. Connect to your own why and your value add of the story that you're trying to tell. So you're very clear in your mind where you're going to go or what the ideas that you want to land for them. But now you go back to the beginning to go, where is the value add and how am I working with my why? And I'd say after that, you start telling the story and you can start in the action. If a story happens and it sets up for too long, it reminds me a lot about that meme at the beginning where there's too much talk, too much contextualizing, too much distraction and scene setting, and we're not in where the action is. If you think about any of the good Star Wars movies versus the Lord of the Rings movies, they always cut in as the action happens. We don't care how they got to the gate. They're at the gate, they're opening the gate, somebody's shooting, we're running, let's get the ears, we're off. The story is going. So if you can cut into the action with your story, it usually is a better place because the audience is catching up versus the scene where Baggins walks to the gate for 10 minutes and it's just a frightful scene because it's really not going anywhere and it's not really helping the story. So after that, you then want to go avoid the unimportant details. The gate and the flowers, not important, just get to the action. Don't rant, which is what I'm doing now. So I'm going to move on to talking a little bit about where to start and when to stop in this world. So I want to get to the ending of stories and how you, in script writing, we use the idea to put a button end to some story. So how are you going to button end the story before you get to the next one? Remember, if a presentation is a string of pearls of thoughts that you are sharing with your audience, it is very distracting if one pearl, one story hasn't dropped yet, it hasn't ended yet, and you're starting the next story because 2 or 3 beats later, you're going to have audience members who go, but we didn't end that one, so it feels incomplete. And that is why for every scene that we write, for every story that we tell, we have to have a good button end that ends it. And I can't tell you where this idea comes from because when I went to look at it online, I couldn't find anything for a button end. I can only think that it comes from the concept of button up, which is that idea to have a complete or final settlement of a thought. And perhaps that's really where it comes from. But to have a neat little bow and tie off each story is a really important thing. So you want to work and craft that ending the most as you work on it. So let's go and look at some ideas for endings, and possibly these are some things that you can have. A powerful insight. You have to make that aha moment drop because you brought the audience in at an angle that they weren't expecting. And because of that, you have this unique perspective on it so that when you land that insight, there's this aha moment, a real surprise as you get into it. Now remember that you want to have that repeatable punchline. Why? Because that's your soundbite. If you told a good gag, if you had a good story that landed, chances are that's the soundbite that the audience is going to walk away with. And then you want to have some easy to implement hint or a tip or a usable resource. Those are the kind of thoughts around what it is that you can land at the end of your story in order to have a really proper button ending to it before you get into the next section or your next story. So as a final visual in this section, I can leave you with this image just to tie a neat bow. Just make sure at the end of it, you've really tied it up nicely. And next up, we're going to talk about some interesting aspects of character and how you can make characters connect with your audience.